Thus began the evening that would quietly rewrite everything that came after it. Before the screams, before the betrayal, before the soldiers with torches and the sound of hammers on nails, there was simply this: a meal. An ordinary Passover meal in an ordinary Jerusalem home, shared by ordinary Jewish families in the year 33 of our era, where the smell of roasted lamb mixed with the smoke of oil lamps, where children asked the ancient questions and fathers recited the ancient answers, where no one yet knew that this particular Thursday night was dividing all of human history into before and after. The city was Jerusalem. The year was 33 Anno Domini. And what you are about to walk through is not just the reconstruction of a religious ceremony. It is the living, breathing, sensory reality of what it meant to sit at a Passover table in that exact moment when heaven held its breath and earth stood on the edge of transformation. To understand what happened in that upper room, where Jesus gathered with his 12, you must first understand what was happening in every other room, in every other home. In the ordinary, sacred, beautiful chaos of a Jerusalem Passover that Thursday night in April of the year 33, Jerusalem during Passover week was not a city, it was a contained explosion. The normal population of approximately 80,000 souls swelled to nearly 10 times that number. Pilgrims poured in from every corner of the Roman world, from Alexandria in Egypt, from Babylon in the east, from the Greek cities of Asia Minor, from Rome itself. They came speaking Aramaic, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, languages that collided in the narrow streets like waters meeting in a storm. The roads leading into the city, especially from the north and east, became rivers of humanity days before the feast. Families carried their lambs, still alive, bleeding as they walked. Others carried bags of grain for the unleavened bread, skins of wine, oil for lamps, bedrolls for sleeping in courtyards or on rooftops, or in the open fields outside the walls. The wealthier families secured rooms in homes months in advance, paying premiums that would make a fisherman from Galilee work half a year to afford a single night. The poor slept wherever they could, grateful for any covered space, any corner out of the wind. And through it all, the smell. The overwhelming, inescapable smell of a city preparing for Passover. Bread baking without yeast, its aroma sharper and somehow more ancient than regular bread. Bitter herbs being prepared, their pungent scent cutting through everything else. And above all, lamb. Thousands upon thousands of lambs being led through the streets toward the temple, their collective bleating creating a sound that was both mournful and strangely hopeful. The temple itself was the heart of everything. If you have never seen the Temple of Herod, you cannot fully understand what it meant to a first-century Jew. It was not simply a building. It was the physical manifestation of God's promise to dwell among his people. The outer courts, vast and gleaming white in the sun, could hold hundreds of thousands of people. The inner courts, restricted by levels of holiness, drew you inward like a sacred geography, each step a step closer to the very presence of the living God. On the afternoon before Passover, as the sun began its descent toward evening, the priests began the slaughter. This was not a quiet, private affair. This was industrial-scale sacrifice, orchestrated with precision born of centuries of practice. Families brought their lambs to the priests in waves, group after group, the gates opening and closing to manage the flow. The lamb had to be male, a year old, without blemish or defect. It had been inspected, approved, accepted. Now, at the moment prescribed by the law of Moses, the father of the family or the head of the household would hold the animal while the priest made the cut. Swift, practiced, merciful. The blood was caught in gold and silver basins, passed from priest to priest in a human chain that ended at the great altar where it was poured out at the base. The blood of thousands of lambs flowing together, pooling, draining away through channels cut into the stone for exactly this purpose. And while this happened, the Levites sang. The Hallel Psalms, Psalms 113 through 118, songs of praise and thanksgiving that had been sung at Passover for generations. Their voices rose above the bleating, above the sound of blood hitting metal basins, above the murmur of hundreds of thousands of pilgrims packed into the courts. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. Life and death mixed together in an act that was both sacrifice and celebration, mourning and joy, remembrance and hope. By the time the sun touched the horizon, the slaughter was complete. Each family had its lamb, now dead, now ready to be taken home and roasted for the feast. The priests were covered in blood to their elbows. The stones of the temple courts ran red with it, and the city prepared for the meal that would mark, once again, the night when the angel of death passed over Egypt and Israel was born as a nation. But what did that meal actually look like? Not in the abstract, not in the symbolic theology we have built around it over 2,000 years, but in the concrete lived reality of an ordinary family in an ordinary home in Jerusalem that Thursday night. Let us walk into one of those homes. Not the upper room where Jesus reclined with the 12, not yet. First, let us see what was normal, what was expected, what every Jewish family in Jerusalem was doing at exactly the same hour. The home belongs to a man we will call Eleazar, a common name then. He is a merchant, moderately successful, deals in olive oil and wine. His wife is named Rivka. They have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, ranging in age from 5 to 15. They are not poor, but neither are they wealthy. They are what we might call middle class, though that term would mean nothing to them. They are simply a family trying to live faithfully, to keep the law, to pass the traditions to their children, to survive and perhaps prosper a little under Roman occupation and the complicated politics of the Sanhedrin and the temple priesthood. The room where they will eat has been prepared for days. Every trace of leaven, of yeast, has been removed from the house. This is not a casual cleaning. It is a ritual purification that involves searching every corner, every crack, every hidden space where even a crumb of leavened bread might hide. The night before, by lamplight, Eleazar walked through the house with his oldest son, using a feather and a wooden spoon to sweep up any final bits of leaven they could find, which they then burned in the morning. The symbolism is ancient and deep. Leaven represents sin, corruption, the pride that puffs up. Removing it is a physical act of spiritual cleansing, preparing not just the house, but the heart for the feast of freedom. The room itself is simple but not bare. Oil lamps burn in niches in the walls, their light warm and flickering. The table is low, and around it are cushions and mats where the family will recline. This reclining posture is important. Slaves eat standing or sitting upright, ready to jump to serve. Free people recline at ease. On this night, every Jew reclines, because on this night every Jew remembers that they are free, that God brought them out of slavery, that they are no longer servants to Pharaoh, but servants to the Lord. On the table, the elements of the Passover meal are arranged with care. The roasted lamb, its skin crispy from the fire, its meat tender and dripping with juice. It has been roasted whole, over an open flame, not a bone broken, exactly as the law requires. Beside it, the unleavened bread, flat and brittle, made without yeast, the bread of affliction that their ancestors ate when they fled Egypt in haste. There are bitter herbs, horseradish or endive, sharp and biting on the tongue, meant to recall the bitterness of slavery. There is a mixture called charoset, a paste made of fruit and nuts and wine, sweet and dark, meant to represent the clay that the Israelites used to make bricks in Egypt. There is salt water, for the tears shed in bondage. There are cups of wine, 4 cups that will be drunk at specific moments in the ritual, each one marking a different promise of God. And there is an expectancy in the air, a sense that this night is different from all other nights, a feeling that is both deeply familiar because they have done this every year of their lives, and also somehow fresh because the story never grows old. Rivka moves around the room, making final adjustments, checking that everything is in place. She has been cooking since early morning. The lamb was delivered from the temple still warm, and she seasoned it with salt and herbs and set it over the fire to roast slowly through the afternoon. The bread she made yesterday, carefully, using flour and water and nothing else, watching it constantly to ensure it did not rise. The bitter herbs she gathered from the market, the charoset she prepared with her daughters, crushing almonds and dates, mixing in wine until the texture was right. She is tired, but it is a good tired, the tiredness of meaningful work, of participating in something larger than herself. Her youngest son, barely 5 years old, keeps asking when they will start, when they will eat, why they have to wait. She smiles and tells him soon, tells him to be patient, tells him that tonight he will get to ask the questions, that tonight is his night to learn the story. The sun has set. The first stars are visible in the darkening sky outside the window. Eleazar gathers the family. They wash their hands, ritually, pouring water from a pitcher over each hand in turn. Then they recline, the children excited and squirming, the adults settling into the familiar rhythm of the ritual. Eleazar begins. He takes the first cup of wine, the cup of sanctification, and he speaks the blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. They drink. The wine is strong and sweet, unfiltered, thick with sediment. It coats the mouth and warms the throat. Already the room feels different, set apart, holy. Eleazar takes a piece of parsley, dips it in the salt water, and distributes it to the family. They eat it together, tasting the salt, remembering the tears. Then comes the moment the children have been waiting for. The youngest son, as tradition requires, asks the 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights we eat leavened bread, but tonight only unleavened bread. On all other nights we eat any kind of herbs, but tonight bitter herbs. On all other nights we do not dip even once, but tonight we dip twice. On all other nights we eat either sitting or reclining, but tonight we all recline. These are not rhetorical questions. They are the hinge on which the entire evening turns. The child asks, and the father answers. And in that exchange, the story passes from one generation to the next, living and active. Eleazar begins to tell the story. He does not read it from a book, though later in history the Haggadah, the written order of service, will become standard. He tells it from memory, from the deep well of repetition and tradition. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and the Lord our God brought us out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. If the Holy One, blessed be He, had not brought our ancestors out of Egypt, then we, our children, and our children's children would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. He tells of the affliction, the hard labor, the bricks without straw, the crying out to God. He tells of Moses, sent to confront Pharaoh, the plagues that came upon Egypt one after another, each one more devastating than the last. Water turning to blood, frogs, lice, flies, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, darkness. And then the 10th plague, the final plague, the one that broke Pharaoh's will and set Israel free. The death of the firstborn. Eleazar's voice drops when he reaches this part of the story. The room is silent. Even the youngest children sense that something important is being said. On that night, God passed through Egypt, and every firstborn son in every household died. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock as well. But the houses of Israel were passed over, because they had done what God commanded. They had taken a lamb without blemish, and they had slaughtered it at twilight. And they had taken the blood and put it on the doorposts and the lintel of their houses. And when the Lord saw the blood, He passed over that house, and the destroyer was not permitted to enter. Rivkah glances at her own sons as Eleazar speaks. She thinks, as every Jewish mother has thought on this night for 1,500 years, what it would mean to lose a child. What it meant for the Egyptians to wake to that horror. What it means that her children are safe because of the blood of a lamb. The thought is too large for words, so she just reaches out and touches her youngest son's head, a quick, tender gesture that he barely notices, but that steadies her. The story continues. The hasty departure from Egypt, the bread that had no time to rise, the journey to the Red Sea. The terror when Pharaoh changed his mind and sent his army after them. The miracle of the sea splitting, the walls of water standing firm while Israel walked through on dry ground. The crashing down of those walls on the pursuing Egyptians. The song of Moses. The journey through the wilderness. The giving of the law at Sinai. The promise of a land flowing with milk and honey. And at each stage of the story, Eleazar pauses to explain, to draw connections, to help his children see that this is not just ancient history, this is their story. This is who they are. They are the people God rescued. They are the people God chose. They are the people of the covenant. The second cup of wine is poured, the cup of deliverance, but not yet drunk. First, the story must be completed, the plagues recounted in full. As Eleazar names each plague, he dips his finger in his wine and lets a drop fall onto his plate. 10 drops, 1 for each plague. It is a small thing, but it is profound. Even in celebrating their freedom, they acknowledge the cost. Even in rejoicing at their salvation, they remember that the Egyptians were also human beings, also made in the image of God. Their suffering, though necessary for Israel's liberation, is not something to celebrate without restraint. Then they drink the second cup together. The wine loosens tongues, warms hearts. The children are more animated now, asking more questions, wanting to know details. Did Moses really part the sea with his staff? How big were the walls of water? Were the people afraid? Eleazar answers as best he can, sometimes with facts, sometimes with tradition, sometimes with honest admissions that he does not know. What matters is not the precision of every detail, but the transmission of the story, the keeping alive of the memory. Now the meal itself begins. Eleazar takes the unleavened bread, breaks it, and speaks another blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. He distributes pieces to the family. They eat. The bread is plain, almost tasteless, dry and crumbly. It is not meant to be delicious. It is meant to be a reminder. This is the bread of affliction, the bread their ancestors ate in their suffering and in their haste to escape. They take bitter herbs, dip them in the charoset, and eat. The bitterness hits hard, sharp and unpleasant, making eyes water. Then the sweetness of the charoset follows, a reminder that even in suffering, God provides moments of relief, hints of the sweetness to come. And then, finally, they eat the lamb. The meat is tender, flavorful, satisfying after the symbolic foods. This is the heart of the meal, the main course, the substance. The lamb that died so they could feast. The lamb whose blood marked them as belonging to God. The lamb that made the difference between death and life. They eat slowly, savoring it, talking and laughing, the solemnity of the ritual giving way to the warmth of family fellowship. Rivka serves more food, vegetables and fruits and nuts, things that are not strictly part of the ritual, but that make the meal a feast. The children eat until they are full, then lean back on their cushions, sleepy and content. The adults linger over their wine, talking in low voices about the state of the city, the Roman soldiers everywhere, the tension that seems to be building, the rumors of a Galilean teacher who some say is the Messiah. Eleazar is skeptical. There have been so many who claim to be the Messiah. All of them ended badly. Rivka says she heard the man healed a blind beggar, that he raised someone from the dead in Bethany just a few days ago. Eleazar shrugs. Miracles or tricks, who can say? What matters is keeping the law, staying faithful, not getting involved in politics that will only bring Roman retribution down on all their heads. They do not know, as they talk, that a few streets away, in a borrowed room much like theirs, that same Galilean teacher is reclining with his disciples, celebrating the same Passover, telling the same story, but adding something new, something that will echo through the centuries, something that will transform this ancient meal into the center of a new covenant. But in Eleazar's house, the ritual continues in the old way. The third cup of wine is poured, the cup of redemption, and another blessing is spoken. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors from Egypt. They drink. The wine is going to their heads now, especially the children, who are not used to it. There is laughter, a lightness, a sense of joy that is the whole point of the evening. This is not meant to be a solemn, somber affair. This is a celebration. God saved them. God brought them out. God made them a nation. God gave them His law. God is faithful. What else is there but to rejoice? The fourth and final cup is poured, the cup of praise. Before they drink it, they sing. The Hallel Psalms, the same ones sung in the temple during the slaughter of the lambs, are now sung in homes throughout Jerusalem. Praise the Lord, all you nations. Extol Him, all you peoples. For great is His love toward us, and the faithfulness of the Lord endures forever. Praise the Lord. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Their voices are not trained, not beautiful, but they are sincere. Eleazar sings with his eyes closed, swaying slightly, lost in the words. Rivka sings with tears on her cheeks, though if you asked her why, she could not quite say. The children sing because their parents are singing, because it feels good to raise their voices, because the music is old and deep and connects them to something beyond themselves. When the song ends, they drink the fourth cup together. The wine is almost gone. The lamps are burning low. It is late, much later than the children usually stay awake, and they are starting to fade, to lean against their parents, to close their eyes. Eleazar speaks a final blessing. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine." And then, quietly, he adds a prayer that is not part of the official ritual, but that is in his heart. Next year in Jerusalem rebuilt. Next year, may we see the Messiah come. Next year, may all this be fulfilled. He does not know how soon his prayer will be answered. He does not know that the Messiah has already come, is right now breaking bread in a room nearby and calling it his body, is right now lifting a cup of wine and calling it his blood, is right now instituting a new Passover that will be celebrated not once a year, but again and again, in every place, for all time. He does not know that before the sun rises, that Messiah will be arrested, beaten, tried, condemned. He does not know that tomorrow, while he sleeps off the wine and the rich food, the Lamb of God will be slaughtered outside the city walls, his blood poured out not into gold basins, but onto the earth, his body broken not for roasting, but for the sin of the world. He does not know that everything is about to change, but in a way, he does know. Every Jew who celebrated Passover that night knew, at some deep, unarticulated level, that the story was not finished, that the lamb they ate was pointing to something, someone, greater, that the blood on the doorposts in Egypt was a sign of a greater deliverance to come, that the Exodus was not the end, but the beginning, the pattern, the promise. This is what a Passover meal in an ordinary Jerusalem home was really like in the year 33 Anno Domini, before the city changed forever. It was sacred and domestic. It was ritual and spontaneous. It was remembering and hoping. It was a meal shared by thousands of families in thousands of homes, all doing the same thing, all telling the same story, all looking back to Egypt and forward to the kingdom of God. And in the middle of it all, in one particular room, with one particular group of men, God himself reclined at table and transformed the old covenant into the new, the shadow into the substance, the promise into the fulfillment. The families like Eleazar's did not see it happen. They went to bed that night full and content, satisfied that they had kept the law, honored the tradition, passed the story to their children. They woke the next morning to a city in chaos, to rumors of a trial and a crucifixion, to the beginning of an upheaval that would ultimately scatter them, destroy their temple, and reshape their world. But the meal remained, the story remained, the lamb remained, now given a name and a face and a meaning that reached far beyond one night of deliverance in Egypt. The details matter, the taste of the unleavened bread, dry and plain, the bite of the bitter herbs, sharp and cleansing, the richness of the lamb, roasted to perfection, the sweetness of the wine, unfiltered and strong, the feeling of reclining, of being at ease, of being free, the sound of children's voices asking questions, of fathers answering, of the whole family singing the ancient psalms together, the smell of smoke and roasted meat and oil lamps burning through the night, the sight of Jerusalem outside the window, the city packed with pilgrims, the temple glowing in the distance, the stars brilliant in the spring sky. These are not incidental. They are the texture of the moment, the sensory reality that made it real for the people who lived it. We talk about the Last Supper, and rightly so, because it was the hinge on which everything turned. But we should also talk about the thousands of other suppers happening at the same time, the ordinary Passovers that provide the context, the background, the expectation against which the extraordinary can be understood. Every family in Jerusalem that night was doing what Eleazar and Rivka did. They were remembering Egypt. They were celebrating freedom. They were eating lamb and unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They were drinking 4 cups of wine. They were teaching their children. They were singing the Hallel. They were looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, to the restoration of Israel, to the day when God would act again in history as powerfully as he did in the Exodus. And God was acting, right then, in ways they could not yet see. The Lamb was among them. The blood was about to be shed. The new Exodus was beginning, not from Egypt, but from sin. Not from Pharaoh, but from death itself. The early Christians, when they began to celebrate the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, understood immediately what Jesus had done. He had taken the Passover, the meal they all knew by heart, and he had made it about himself. The unleavened bread was his body, broken for them. The cup of wine was his blood, shed for the forgiveness of sins. The lamb they ate every Passover was him, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This was not a break from Judaism. It was the fulfillment of Judaism. It was the thing the Passover had been pointing to all along. And for those first Jewish believers, the connection was immediate and obvious and overwhelming. They had been eating this meal their entire lives, and suddenly they saw what it meant, who it was about, where it was leading. The blood on the doorposts in Egypt was a foreshadowing of the blood of Christ on the cross. The lamb sacrificed at twilight was a type of the lamb sacrificed at Golgotha. The deliverance from slavery was a picture of the deliverance from sin. The journey through the wilderness to the promised land was a picture of the journey through this world to the kingdom of heaven. It all fit together. It all made sense. It was as if they had been looking at a puzzle their whole lives, and suddenly someone showed them the picture on the box, and they could see how every piece connected. But on that Thursday night, for families like Eliezer's, the puzzle was still unsolved. They celebrated as their fathers had celebrated, as their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had celebrated, going back 1,000 years and more. They told the story. They ate the meal. They sang the songs. They went to bed grateful and faithful and completely unaware that the world had just tilted on its axis. Friday morning, the news would spread. A man has been crucified, a teacher from Galilee. Some said he claimed to be the Messiah. Some said he performed miracles. Some said he was a blasphemer. Some said he was innocent. Eliezer would hear the news and shake his head and go about his business. Another would be Messiah dead. Another group of followers scattered. Another lesson that you cannot fight Rome with miracles and speeches. Rivka would hear the news and feel a pang of sadness. She had heard the man speak once, briefly, in the outer courts of the temple. He had a kind face. He spoke with authority but also with gentleness. She had liked him. She was sorry he was dead. The children would barely notice. One crucifixion among many. One death in a city where people died every day. But somewhere, in the hearts of a small group of devastated disciples, the pieces were beginning to move. They did not understand yet. They were shattered, terrified, hiding. But in 3 days they would understand. In 3 days, the Lamb who was slain would stand up alive. In 3 days, the new Exodus would be revealed in power. In 3 days, the Passover would never be the same again. The meal in Eleazar's home, the ordinary Passover, was not less significant because it was ordinary. It was the soil in which the extraordinary took root. It was the tradition that gave meaning to the innovation. It was the old covenant that made the new covenant comprehensible. Without the countless ordinary Passovers, the Last Supper would have been unintelligible. Without the blood of the lambs on thousands of doorposts in Egypt, the blood of Christ on the cross would have lacked its interpretive framework. Without the story told by fathers to children for generations, the story of Jesus would have had no vocabulary, no grammar, no structure. God works in history. He does not drop truth from the sky disconnected from context. He plants it in culture, in tradition, in the daily lives of ordinary people doing ordinary things in obedience to His word. And then, at the right moment, He takes the ordinary and fills it with the extraordinary. He takes the familiar and reveals its hidden depths. He takes the shadow and shows the reality casting it. That Thursday night in Jerusalem in the year 33 was full of such moments. In every home, the shadow. In one home, the reality. In every home, the remembrance of an old deliverance. In one home, the inauguration of a new deliverance. In every home, the hope that the Messiah would come. In one home, the Messiah present, knowing that in hours He would be betrayed, abandoned, killed, and that through it all, He was accomplishing the salvation of the world. The ordinary and the extraordinary existed side by side, in the same city, on the same night, often without the ordinary even knowing the extraordinary was there. This is how God works. Quietly, often. hiddenly, usually. Among the everyday rhythms of ordinary people living ordinary lives, he inserts the moments that change everything. And later, looking back, we see the threads connecting, the patterns emerging, the story making sense. Eleazar and Rivka and their children were part of that story, even though they never knew it. Their faithful observance of the Passover, their careful teaching of their children, their sincere prayers for the coming of the Messiah, all of it mattered. All of it was part of the great tapestry God was weaving. And so we come full circle. The ordinary Passover meal in Jerusalem in the year 33, before the city changed forever, was a meal of remembrance, of hope, of family, of faithfulness. It was the keeping of a commandment given 1,500 years earlier. It was the passing on of identity from one generation to the next. It was the taste of freedom and the memory of slavery. It was the expectation of redemption not yet fully realized. And in its ordinariness, in its very typicality, it bore witness to the extraordinary thing happening just a few streets away, where the one who gave the commandment in the first place was now fulfilling it, completing it, transforming it into something that would feed not just one nation, but all nations, not just for one night, but for all time. The lamp flames in Eleazar's home burned down to embers. The family slept. Outside in the darkness, the drama of redemption moved forward, inexorable, terrible, glorious. Before sunrise, the betrayal. Before noon, the trial. Before evening, the death. And then, after the Sabbath, the dawn, the empty tomb, the risen Lord. The world changed forever. But none of that erases the beauty and significance of the ordinary Passover meal, the one celebrated by thousands that night, the one that gave shape and meaning to what Jesus did. Both matter, the ordinary and the extraordinary, the shadow and the substance, the old and the new. Together, they tell the whole story, the story of a God who saves, who remembers, who keeps his promises, who works in history through ordinary people and ordinary meals and ordinary nights that turn out to be not ordinary at all. The meal in Eleazar's home that night was not recorded in any chronicle. No historian wrote down what prayers he said or how his children responded. His name appears in no official record, no genealogy preserved for posterity. Yet in homes across Jerusalem, across Judea, across the diaspora, this same scene repeated itself. Families gathering, breaking bread, telling the story, passing faith from generation to generation. This was how Judaism survived, not through grand temples alone, though the temple was magnificent, not through high priests and Sanhedrin councils alone, though they had their place, but through ordinary homes, where ordinary fathers told the story to ordinary children who would grow up to tell it to their children in turn. The genius of Passover was precisely this, that it could not be centralized, could not be controlled entirely by religious authorities, could not be restricted to one place or one class. Yes, the lamb had to be slaughtered at the temple while the temple stood, but the meal itself happened in homes. The telling of the story happened around family tables. The questions came from children, not scribes. The answers were given by mothers and fathers, not priests. This made the faith resilient, portable, able to survive even when the temple fell, even when Jerusalem was destroyed, even when the people were scattered to the ends of the earth. Eleazar could not have known, as he lay down to sleep that night, that within a generation his beloved temple would be gone, that Roman soldiers would breach the walls in 70 AD, would burn the sanctuary, would cast down the stones until not one stood upon another, just as Jesus had prophesied, that the priests would be killed or scattered, the sacrifices ended, the city left in ruins. But Judaism would survive because of nights like this, because the faith had been encoded into family rhythms, woven into the fabric of home life, embedded in meals and stories and questions and answers that needed no temple, no priesthood, no central authority to continue. Christianity would follow a similar pattern. After Jesus transformed the Passover meal into the Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, the Mass, after he took the bread and cup and gave them new meaning, that too would be celebrated in homes. In the book of Acts, we read of believers breaking bread from house to house. In Paul's letters, we hear of churches meeting in homes, sharing meals, remembering Jesus together. The upper room where Jesus celebrated that final Passover became the model for countless homes where his followers would gather. The early church did not have cathedrals or basilicas. They had homes like Eleazar's. They had ordinary people gathering around ordinary tables to do something extraordinary, to remember the death and resurrection of Jesus, to proclaim the Lord's death until he comes, to taste and see that the Lord is good. The Passover model of household faith, of table fellowship, of ritual and remembrance enacted in domestic space, this became the template for Christian worship as well. So when we imagine Eleazar's home that night, we are not just looking back at something ancient and foreign. We are seeing the beginning of a pattern that continues. Families still gather. Tables are still set. Stories are still told. Questions are still asked and answered. The forms have changed. Few of us recline on cushions. Fewer still eat roasted lamb prepared according to Levitical specifications. But the essence remains. We gather to remember. We eat to proclaim. We tell the story to the next generation. In Eleazar's home, there would have been one more element we should consider: the singing. After the meal, after the questions and answers, after the cups and the matzah and the lamb, came the Hallel, the Psalms of praise. These were Psalms 113 through 118, songs of deliverance and thanksgiving that had been associated with Passover for centuries. Eleazar would have led his family in singing these ancient words, his voice perhaps rough and untrained but earnest, his children joining in on the familiar phrases they had memorized. When Israel went out from Egypt, the house of Jacob from a people of strange language, Judah became his sanctuary, Israel his dominion. The sea looked and fled. Jordan turned back. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. The words of Psalm 114 recalled the great miracles, the parting of the Red Sea, the stopping of the Jordan River, the power of God displayed on behalf of his people. Eleazar's children would have known these words by heart, would have sung them every year, would have felt the weight of their heritage in every phrase. And then, Psalm 118, which concluded the Hallel. "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever." This was the psalm that spoke of stones rejected becoming cornerstones, of gates of righteousness, of the one who comes in the name of the Lord. These words were on Eleazar's lips that night, just as they had been on Jesus's lips across the city. The same words, the same tune, the same ancient faith expressed in song. Music was woven into the fabric of Jewish life. In the temple, the Levites sang elaborate compositions accompanied by instruments. In the synagogue, prayers were chanted, and in homes, families sang together. Psalms, blessings, traditional melodies passed down through generations. This was not performance music, not entertainment, but participatory worship. Everyone sang. Children learned by joining in, by hearing the melodies year after year until they became second nature. The quality of the singing mattered less than the act of singing together. Eleazar was no Levitical choir director, and his children's voices likely cracked and wavered on the high notes, but they sang. They raised their voices in praise and remembrance. They let the ancient words shape their understanding of who they were and whose they were. This was formation through participation, education through ritual, theology encoded in melody. After the singing, after the final cup, the family would have gradually dispersed to their sleeping areas. Sarah and Judith would have checked that the lamp had enough oil to burn through the night. It was customary to keep a light burning on Passover night, a reminder of the pillar of fire that guided the Israelites through the wilderness. Naomi would have made sure the younger children were settled. Eleazar might have stayed up a while longer, perhaps stepping out into the courtyard to look at the stars, to breathe the night air, to ponder the great story they had just retold. The night was quiet now, but across the city, things were in motion. In the garden called Gethsemane, Jesus prayed in agony while his disciples slept. Soon Judas would arrive with soldiers and torches. The kiss of betrayal, the arrest, Peter's sword flashing in the lamplight, cutting off the servant's ear, Jesus' rebuke and healing, the disciples scattering, the long night of trials beginning, first before Annas, then Caiaphas, then the Sanhedrin, the mockery, the beatings, the false witnesses, the high priest tearing his robes, the charge of blasphemy. And outside in the courtyard, Peter warming himself by a fire, denying 3 times that he even knew Jesus, then hearing the rooster crow and remembering and weeping bitterly. Eleazar knew none of this. He lay on his sleeping mat, his wife beside him, his children breathing quietly in the darkness. Tomorrow would be the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a special Sabbath, a day of rest and celebration. They would go to the temple, perhaps, offer the festive sacrifices, see friends and extended family. Life would continue in its familiar rhythms. The barley harvest would begin soon. Business would resume after the festival days. The cycle of seasons and festivals and ordinary life would roll on. But even as he slept, the world was changing. The sacrifice that would end all sacrifices was approaching. The Lamb of God was being led to slaughter. The one whom Eleazar would have welcomed at his table, would have honored as a rabbi and teacher, was being condemned by the religious authorities Eleazar had been taught to respect. The same establishment that preserved the temple rituals and taught the Torah was now arranging the judicial murder of the Messiah they claimed to be waiting for. This is part of the tragedy and the mystery, that those most devoted to the symbols often miss the reality they point to. The priests who daily offered lambs failed to recognize the lamb. The experts in Scripture who could quote prophecies could not see their fulfillment. The guardians of tradition became the enemies of its completion. Not all of them, certainly. There were members of the Sanhedrin who believed, like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. There were priests who later became Christians, as Acts tells us. But the leadership, the majority, the official position, these rejected Jesus. And ordinary faithful Jews like Eleazar? They simply didn't know. They celebrated Passover as they always had. They trusted their leaders. They kept the commandments as best they could. They loved God and tried to live faithfully. They were not villains or fools. They were people of their time, shaped by their culture, doing what seemed right and good according to the light they had. We cannot judge them harshly for not recognizing something that was, in fact, incredibly difficult to recognize. That God Himself had come to dwell among them, that the Messiah looked so different from what they expected, that salvation was arriving in a form that contradicted almost every assumption they held.